Malcolm X once said, "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing." In today's digital world, Black people can get their news from anywhere. Plenty of topics that were never covered in Black media just a century ago, from environmental racism to Black nationalism to sex, are available with just the click of a button. This is the benefit of the glorious internet, where fact-checking journalists can exhaustively labor over groundbreaking pieces that get less views than a post about the latest TikTok hooligan shenanigans or new movie gossip. While many of us notice the lapse in news coverage or tremendous bias when it comes to mainstream outlets handling our stories, we have also noticed a death of Black-owned media outlets that put our experiences and narratives first. But this has been an ongoing trend. For instance, the first Black radio station was the $50,000 purchase of Word in Atlanta in 1949 by prominent professor, accountant, and activist Jesse B. Blayton, who coincidentally was the first Black certified personal accountant in the state of Georgia. Black people had appeared on radio stations before, mainly in variety shows and soap operas, but there was little to no news. Word played the newly growing rhythm and blues genre while also hiring mainly Black employees and publicizing the civil rights movement with a conservative viewpoint. Not only was it only allowed to operate from sunrise to sunset, it was allocated limited frequency power and struggled to turn a profit through ads. Though it was widely popular among Atlanta's Black population, it was eventually sold in 1968. By 1972, there were 14 Black-owned and operated radio stations. In the 70s, Black activists in rural areas utilized radio, which was easier to obtain than TV airtime and reached more people in the community because TVs were more expensive than radios. By 1995, there were 146 Black-owned stations, but that number has been dropping since 1996 thanks to the Telecommunications Act, which allowed radio conglomerates to take over in local areas and ignore the needs of area citizens. In the past decade, the number has dropped to just 68. Meanwhile, out of over 1,000 TV stations in the country, Black people own a paltry 6. The major Black magazines still left are struggling to stay afloat, with historic publications like Ebony recently recovering from financial struggles and accusations of not paying writers. Essence magazine just recently, in 2018, wrestled itself from 13 years of Time Inc. ownership to be Black-owned. Viacom owns Black Entertainment Television. Popular Black blogs have been picked up by larger companies whose advertising dollars cease to appear if certain topics are breached. In our increasingly damaged and racially divided country, this spells trouble for Black citizens. Even before our emancipation from slavery, the ability to tell our own stories and criticize the America we live in has been crucial to our survival and progression. Without our own media outlets, we are placing our stories and our futures into the hands of the oppressors. From abolition papers to BET, how have Black Americans spread the news? Before the Civil War, the three pieces of media that gave the enslaved and free Blacks leverage in the fight for abolition were narratives of the enslaved, transcripts of their speeches, and abolitionist newspapers. These three things offered an alternative and raw view of slavery that couldn't be ignored by the masses. It was one thing for white people to hear abolitionists of their own hue describe the horrors of slavery that they had never experienced firsthand, and completely another to hear it straight from the source. Enslaved narratives are also super important because they documented the cruelties of the era that many lost cause historians would later try to obscure. The very first Black-owned newspaper was called Freedom's Journal, published in winter 1827 by three Black New Yorkers who stated, "Too long have others spoken for us." The paper shut down after just 2 years, but by the Civil War, 24 other Black papers had been established, the most notable being Frederick Douglass's The North Star in 1847. He wrote, "It's essential that there should arrive in our ranks authors and editors as well as orators, for it is in these capacities that the most permanent good can be rendered to our cause." In the months and years following the end of the Civil War, there was an explosion of over 500 Black newspapers, mainly printed on church presses. Reconstruction was an era of white fear, marred by Ku Klux Klan violence and Confederate veteran retaliation that culminated in property destruction, lynchings, and rapes. These events went unreported in white papers or were told in sympathetic tones, so black newspapers took on the duty of reporting these cases, though in the South, this could mean facing murder and destruction. One famous example is that of Ida B. Wells, who reported on the lynch murders of her friend, a black grocer, and two of his employees in the Memphis Free Speech in 1892. His name was Thomas Moss, and he owned People's Grocery, which was thriving and drawing black business away from William Barrett, a white grocer. The white editor of the local Memphis paper, the Commercial Appeal, urged for retaliation against the black wench, and the newspaper office was burnt to the ground. Miss Wells was warned to not return or she would be lynched. Meanwhile, white papers like the New York Times fanned the flames, declaring, "To punish the lynchers, Memphis Negroes thirsting for vengeance," affirming racist beliefs about a conspiracy by violent black people in the area. No copies of the Memphis Free Speech exist today, and we only know of its reporting through reprinted articles in other papers, and Ida's own writings and recollections in other papers. The People's Grocery lynching is what further encouraged Ida to publish her groundbreaking works on lynching in America. Despite the risk of running a black paper, entrepreneurs and journalists forged on. By 1910, the number of black-owned papers had settled to a respectable 275. Two of the most iconic were the California Eagle and the Chicago Defender. Both played integral roles to the great migration of black people out of the Jim Crow South. The California Eagle was founded by John J. Nemore in 1879, who wanted to offer advice and information on moving to California by listing jobs and housing. It was made an institution of the early 20th century by Charlotta Bass, who made a deathbed promise to Nemore in 1912 to be the editor of the paper. She would do so for 40 years, proving to be the right choice by growing the paper's circulation and even leading a campaign against 1916's racist film, Birth of a Nation. The Chicago Defender was founded in 1905 by Robert S. Abbott, who originally tried being a professional printer and lawyer. He even graduated from law school, but couldn't get into either field due to discrimination. Luckily for Black America, he entered journalism. There are a number of things Abbott did with the Defender that led to him being the first black millionaire publisher. For starters, he employed tactics of white papers, like sensationalizing stories with bold headlines and sarcastic commentary. Black people were also not referred to as Negroes, but as the race. Also, because he was based in Chicago, Abbott could say things that Southern black papers couldn't, and made sure to cover every lynching. He sent copies of the Chicago Defender down south, where he urged black people to stand their ground, fight back, and kill white folks if need be. When the white fiends come to the door, shoot them down. When the mob comes, take at least one with you, historian James Grossman repeated from the Defender. The paper became a popular read in black gathering places, and readers were encouraged to share the papers with as many friends and family as possible. After the northern labor shortage during World War I, Abbott began instructing black people to move north for jobs and opportunities. He started publishing job listings, one-way train schedules, housing information, and detailed descriptions of black Chicago neighborhood amenities to entice black Southerners into moving. Every black man, for the sake of his wife and daughters especially, should leave even at financial sacrifice, wrote one editorial. White Southerners even started noticing the migration and got so pissed that a crucial and underpaid component of the workforce was leaving that they began trying to confiscate the Chicago Defender. Even though the paper pushed respectability politics, namely publishing pieces cautioning black Southerners from bringing their ghetto ways up north, it helped change the landscape of black America in the 20th century and played a significant role in the Great Migration. That's iconic. Another iconic black newspaper is New York Amsterdam News, founded in 1909 with just $10 by James Henry Anderson, and it's even still operating a website today, though in 1909 a paper copy was 10 cents a piece. In 1936, it became the only black newspaper to fully unionize all departments, and it published many notable writers from W.E.B. Du Bois to Malcolm X. So there was a surge of black newspapers after 1919's Red Summer, a time in which hundreds of black people were murdered and dozens of violent riots took place. Racism and a labor shortage among freshly returned World War I veterans and newly transplanted black Southerners in northern cities were at the root of all the bloodshed. More than ever, black papers served the important role of reporting on lynching and informing readers on the best ways to navigate racism in unfamiliar cities. These papers became an absolute staple of the black community for the next 40 years. The pros were that they could write what they wanted and report on things the white press ignored. The advancement of photography meant more positive images of black life that weren't white-drawn caricatures or stereotypes or photos of lynching victims. There were even black cartoons that contrasted the racist imagery in white papers. Black writers at these publications were treated like celebrities in the community and held in high regard. Meanwhile, they were painfully underpaid due to a major con of black newspaper ownership, a lack of advertising dollars. Black papers depended on circulation for money, while white papers could depend on companies desperate for ad space to target white consumers. Black papers had to take what they could get, and it's no surprise that papers from these time periods are peppered liberally with skin bleaching advertisements. Another big paper during the first half of the 20th century was the Pittsburgh Courier. It initially ran weekly by a group of 5 men, but came under Robert Lee Vann in 1910 and saw major growth after World War I. The Pittsburgh Courier is noteworthy because it allowed for conflicting beliefs within its pages, with 15 columnists at its height who ranged from radical to conservative. The Pittsburgh Courier demonstrated its influence over the black population when Vann encouraged black people, who usually supported Republican candidates if they could vote, to vote for the Democratic Roosevelt in the wake of the Great Depression. He was rewarded with the empty gift of being special assistant to the Attorney General. I say empty because he quit after 2 years of largely being ignored in the position due to his skin color. The Pittsburgh Courier came under fire during World War II when it advocated for fighting both the war overseas and fighting racial discrimination at home. It became known as the Double V campaign, meaning double victory, and even spawned a hairstyle, a song, fashion, and baseball events. It wasn't long before this campaign spread to other papers. The Pittsburgh Courier and other papers also reported on racism in the military, which the government thought would hurt morale. It's no surprise that the military began trying to keep troops from receiving black newspapers, even going so far as to burn them. J. Edgar Hoover considered the Double V campaign seditious, claiming that it would incite rioting and terrorism, so he convinced Roosevelt to order hearings to prove it. In 1942, Hoover presented reports to Attorney General Francis Biddle and asked him to indict a group of black publishers for treason. The new publisher of the Chicago Defender, John Singstack, met with Biddle in 1942. Biddle informed him, quote, "If you don't stop writing this stuff, we're gonna take some black publishers to court under the Espionage Act." Singstack was unfazed. "What are we supposed to do about it? These are facts and we ain't gonna stop. That's what it's all about." Amazingly, Singstack and Biddle reached an agreement that nobody would be prosecuted if the Double V campaign didn't escalate. By the end of the war, black news circulation was a combined 2 million. But there was another new player on the black media field, Johnson Publishing and Negro Digest, the first truly popular black magazine. Magazines up until that point had never been a truly popular medium. Prior to the 20th century, there were church and abolition magazines that would bore the average reader to tears. Then there was Colored American Magazine, which debuted in 1900. For its first 4 years, leading contributor Pauline E. Hopkins critiqued Jim Crow America, something that led to her firing when the notoriously racist, accommodating Booker T. Washington acquired the magazine in 1904. Just 2 years later, the magazine asserted that it was not focused on activism or difficult and complicated social problems. By 1909, the paper was over, prompting W.E.B. Du Bois to write in NAACP's own magazine, The Crisis, that it had become so conciliatory, innocuous, and uninteresting that it died died a peaceful death almost unnoticed by the public. There was also the single magazine issue of Fire, published in 1926 by various members of the Harlem Renaissance. Leaders of the talented 10th found it vulgar and regressive for addressing colorism, homosexuality, promiscuity, and sex work. The irony, after the single issue, Fire headquarters burned to the ground and never reopened. While there were plenty of black newspapers during the 40s, John H. Johnson saw a void to be filled in magazines. Johnson started the Negro Digest with a tiny $500 loan, as both black and white people he knew rejected investing because they thought a black magazine would fail. After building success like the Negro Digest, Johnson published Ebony Magazine in 1945, targeting middle-class blacks with glossy articles, moderate politics, and photos of black life. Jet magazine followed in 1951, and it addressed racism and the civil rights movement along with current news, but was also moderate and glossy by featuring articles on fashion, gossip, scandals, and celebrity more than radical papers and introspective magazines like Negro Digest, which later rebranded as Black World in 1970 with an Afrocentric vibe. Jet was also extremely popular thanks to the famous Jet Beauty of the Week section, which, while not risque by today's standards, sexualized and celebrated black women during a time when black beauty and sex positivity was not mainstream. Women who appeared in the section, which debuted in 1952, were all shades and had a variety of features. Martenzie Johnson wrote, quote, "There were those who used Beauty of the Week as a launching pad. Jeanette Du Bois, who played wisecracking neighbor Willona Woods on Good Times, appeared in 1977. The most famous of the bunch was blaxploitation film actress Pam Grier, who was set to star in 1971's The Big Dollhouse when she posed for the magazine in a two-piece bathing suit in Chicago. But Jet Beauty of the Week was problematic because it published dress size measurements, didn't feature plus-size women, and though most of the participants in the early days appeared in bikinis, some were as young as 15. By the 1960s, because the articles weren't too radical, advertisement companies felt comfortable sending custom ads to black magazines. Johnson Publishing also produced a slew of short-lived magazines in the 50s targeting black women like Hugh and Tan. They published pieces on celebrities and salacious true stories. You know, like my husband beat me before he cheated on me with my wife and ran off to join the circus, like stories like that. At the same time that Johnson was running his publishing empire, scandalous true story magazines like Jive were being manufactured by white-owned companies targeting black consumers. These magazines included sexy women and trifling stories that served as a sharp opposition to the carefully curated image of respectability in Ebony and Jet. Still, Johnson Publishing faced little competition from actual black-owned magazines well into the 70s. Black newspapers, along with Ebony and Jet, continued to be pillars of the black media community during the civil rights movement. The California Eagle published passionate editorials on discriminatory housing and police brutality, which angered cops, the Real Estate Association, and the Housing Authority. The FBI even began following the editor, Charlotta Bass, and the post office even launched an investigation to revoke the paper's mailing privileges on the basis that Bass was a communist. This was a big no-no during the period of the Red Scare. Her radical stance of connecting capitalism and racism made her a troublemaker in the eyes of many black people, and circulation for the California Eagle dwindled. Subscribers began turning to the fluffier Los Angeles Sentinel, so Bass ended up selling the paper in 1951. It was shut down just 13 years later. Jet and the Chicago Defender published the brutal and sobering images of Emmett Till's corpse in 1955. But it's also important to remember that these magazines were not perfect and didn't include the full scope of black living experiences in the 20th century, specifically for those who didn't fit the aesthetic and the respectability mold. For instance, black activist and writer Ann Moody recalled in a 1985 interview that Ebony wanted nothing to do with her or coming of age in Mississippi, which is personally my favorite memoir because of her marriage to a white man. She went further, saying a Harlem newspaper, quote, wrote a real put down. It was based solely upon the fact that I was married to a white man. While many black papers at this time avoided discussing class issues, criticizing capitalism, or covering alternative, aka non-mainstream black lifestyles and flattering lights, many tried to cover the ongoing civil rights related violence of the South with the little resources they had. But increasingly in the 50s and 60s, they were competing with white media who were now covering the movement in print and on TV. Suddenly, Suddenly, black people could read about themselves in mainstream papers. These same papers were increasingly hiring black writers, and for much better pay than what was offered at black papers. Compounded with the impact of TV and radio on print media, black papers began struggling more than ever before. Those who managed to survive were now hooking major advertisement deals from companies who suddenly saw the revenue potential in the black community. While this meant black papers could now depend on ad space rather than circulation for funds, they now faced a decreased amount of editorial control. Papers found themselves toning down criticisms of white America, which would only add to the alleged post-racial narrative that began to dominate our society in the 70s. The exceptions could be found in radical and alternative newspapers like the one printed by the Black Panther Party, which sold roughly 100,000 to 300,000 copies a week between 1968 to 1972. The Black Panther was one of the most popular black papers during those years, going for just a quarter a pop. The Nation of Islam also had its own paper. Muhammad Speaks, published by Elijah Muhammad since the 30s, had an estimated circulation of 600,000 in the 60s. It later became the final call under Louis Farrakhan. Apart from these papers, by the end of the 60s, the influence and circulation of black newspapers had declined significantly and would never again be as popular as they were in the early 20th century. The slow deaths of newspapers didn't slow down magazines, though. Ebony and Jet became more popular during the 70s and 80s, the additions of publications like Black Enterprise, Essence, Right On, Sister to Sister, and Emerge Magazine meant more diverse selections for black consumers. There was a bit of drama when Essence was launched, by the way. The four black founders began working on Essence in 1968, envisioning a magazine for upper-class black women. But after a $250,000 investment from Playboy and Hugh Hefner, two of the four came to believe the company would have too much control over the magazine and left, starting a behind-the-scenes, in-court power struggle over the following decade. The magazine also went through 3 editors in just 1 year, though it eventually found its groove with Marsha Ann Gillespie, who was then replaced with Susan Taylor in 1981. The next great frontier of black media to be explored was TV, but the job that black print media did during the 20th century, informing, uplifting, and promoting discourse, would be abandoned in the TV world for quick bucks. Zook. When the U.S. government first started giving away our airwaves in the 1930s, they were distributed exclusively to white male owners. It mostly stayed this way until the 70s, when the FCC tried to remedy the problem by implementing a minority ownership policy. The measure offered tax incentives to people seeking to sell stations to minority owners. During that decade, as a result, 10 black-owned television stations popped up. None would make quite a big of an impact as BET. When future billionaire Robert L. Johnson launched Black Entertainment Television in 1980, it initially ran 2 hours of weekly programming in a few East Coast cities. By 1984, it was 24 hours. Most of the programming was actually infomercials. By 1995, it reached 47 million homes. Johnson was tasked with generating programs for a broad spectrum of black people, which is no easy task. A major chunk of programming was music videos and music specials, filling a need for broadcasting black artistry that MTV wasn't interested in filling. In 1988, BET News with Ed Gordon was added, kicking off a short-lived trend of regular news programs on the channel. BET's most notorious news special of the 90s was an interview with the recently acquitted O.J. Simpson in 1995. But by 1996, the channel was under fire for its lack of original programming and news. BET News was a weekly show, and there were 2 daily 60-second news briefs. Wrote Holly Bass in March 1996, BET's programming covers 3 basic groups: music, infomercials, and other. The other category is principally composed of reruns of music award shows, reruns of sitcoms, reruns of reruns. Commentary like this prompted Johnson to say, quote, "When they're on white networks, they're called classics. When they're on BET, they're called tired, old reruns." The lack of original content was due to a lack of big advertisement money, and BET made the decision to supplement their lineup with comedy specials, which which they found cheaper to produce than news and music videos. The most popular was Comic View, which aired 11 hours a week and had steady audiences of 450,000 or more. The issue? Comedians who appeared on the show were overworked and paid $150 per appearance with no residuals from all of the reruns. Once this became public knowledge, black entertainers finally spoke out against the channel, said former Comic View host D.L. Hughley. Because it's black people mistreating black people, everyone's been hesitant to speak up. Johnson, who was anti-union, was pissed. In 1999, Aaron Magruder used his Boondocks comic strip to criticize BET and Johnson, whom he saw would put dollars over the interests of black people.
Welcome to BET headquarters. I'm their believer. It's 2 p.m., so it's time for a morning staff meeting. Our leader, Bob Johnson, had a dream. A dream of creating a network that would accomplish what hundreds of years of slavery, Jim Crow, and malt liquor couldn't. The destruction of black people!
Johnson wrote a public letter saying, quote, "The most appalling of Magruder's reckless charges was that BET does not serve the interests of black people. Our response to this slanderous assertion is that the 500 plus dedicated employees of BET do more in one day to serve the interests of African Americans than this young man has done his entire life." Well, damn. Popular series like BET Teen Summit, BET Talk with Tavis Smiley, and Lead Stories seem to back this up. But just a little over 1 year after that statement, Johnson sold BET to Viacom for $3 billion and over 40 employees were fired. And as you notice, those educational programs came to an end. The notoriously raunchy adult program BET Uncut began its 5-year run in 2001. By 2002, all news programs had been eliminated except for BET Nightly News. BET had even come to own Emerge Magazine in 1991, which focused on political and social issues. It too was shut down in 2000. An African-American company gains a considerable amount of capital when it sells out to a powerful conglomerate, said former Lead Story panelist George E. Curry at the time. But it also loses something important. Regardless of how BET tries to spin it, the loss of these important programs represents a major setback for the black community. In the years that followed the Viacom purchase of BET, the channel has continued to live up to its name as entertainment television and little more. Entertainment is important, and black people deserve to relax and unwind with guilty pleasures. Don't think that I believe the opposite, so save your comments. But BET could focus on making history, current affairs, and social justice issues more entertaining to young black Americans. But instead, it has been prioritizing content that reinforces stereotypes from played 80s and 90s sitcoms and movies, promotes celebrity idolatry, glorifies wealth and violence, and somehow ties it all together with Christian rhetoric and gospel on Sunday mornings. The same way black newspapers of the early 20th century had great freedom in reporting, thanks to having no advertisers to answer to, internet-age media outlets like mine can say what needs to be said. But like our 20th century forerunners, there is a serious drawback. We don't have the budgets to keep up with the outlets that churn out nonsense, nor do we always have the ability to cover many events at once. We shouldn't have to hope a serious black issue goes viral enough so that hit-obsessed outlets like the Shade Room pick it up and report on it. Systemic issues should be discussed at length, not every once in a while when boiling water threatens to blow the lid. The true battle of our digital media age is that black media outlets must compete with glossy celebrity gossip for short attention spans. We must grapple with popular for-the-culture aesthetic sites and magazines like Complex, whose advertising budgets and clickbait headlines cheapen the culture to stay afloat. We must come across as party poopers who do the nuanced legwork of addressing not just racism, but classism and wealth culture as well, something BET and other major gatekeepers don't seem all that interested in. To truly be competitive with these internet outlets like the Shade Room and established behemoths like BET, we have to come up with creative ways to provide attention-grabbing visuals packed with substance on a shoestring budget. We need to be making black scholarship more accessible to those in our community by packaging ideas and statistics creatively through black media. As mentioned at the top of this video, Malcolm X once said, "If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing." TV and the internet caused many newspapers and magazines to fold, not just black ones. But our written media has always served a greater purpose than white media, to challenge racist views, to tell our own stories, and to inform each other about the race and class realities of America when we do the inevitable and get too comfortable with bread and circuses. The internet is our key written media now. If there's one thing to be learned from the history of black American media, it's that we can't rely on money from conglomerates or advertisement companies to honor the value of smart, nuanced, and insightful media in our community. If we don't invest in black media and make it one of our top priorities, black people will continue to echo the views and interests of their oppressors.